that section. Okay, now we've done that, we're going to turn this jet to the outside or inside. Alrighty, so we're turning it to the wrong side like that. Flicking it, making sure it all flicks around the right way. It should all flick around the right way so that you should expose your jet to the other side. We're just going to make sure, with our fingers, we're just going to push that seam up a little bit. And with my fingers, just work it so that that seam just goes up. The same with the bottom one, wants to go down. So I'm just going to work it with my fingers just so it just helps you to press in that line. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to manipulate our two jets. I keep saying welts for. The top one and the bottom one, and we're going to pin them to be the correct width. So grab your pins. Just work them with your hands. Keep rolling with your hands between your thumb and your fingers to get them about 6 mils wide. And I'm just pinning in the ditch, and then I'm going to do the same with the lower one, making sure that seam is going up and that seam is going down on the inside. Same deal, rolling it between my thumb and my fingers to make sure that we get it about 6 mils. Once we've roughly pinned it, we're then going to check it, lay it nice and flat and check it before we go any further. Okay, so now let's lay them nice and flat. I'm going to tuck my ends inside so I can actually, doesn't really, for no other point than that, so I can, when it's sitting nice and flat, I can see that there's no gap at each end. Okay, that's what I'm looking for. I'm wanting to see that these two, when they're sitting flat, are meeting perfectly at the end here and the end here. If they're not, just rejig it, re-roll it with your fingers. We're trying to make sure that they're both even. So if this top one is 6 mils, then the bottom one should be 6 mils. So just use your fingers, keep rolling in and out and repinning, because what we want in this end here is for them to join and meet absolutely perfectly in that end, that corner on each end. So we're going to flip it around. You can see on this one there's a bit of a gap. I don't want a gap. Once again, re-roll it so that it's a bit fatter, so that they meet perfectly. And we're trying to, as well as trying to meet, we're trying to make sure that the top welt and the bottom welt are the same width the whole way along. Okay, just keep working them to the right. I think this one almost is. Beautiful. Now they're meeting perfectly. That's what I want in these two ends here. I don't want any gaps. The middle might look like it's a bit of a gap, but not really. It's just because it's pulling apart. But your ends should be meeting absolutely perfectly. They can't overlap. They can't have a gap, but they must meet perfectly. That's really important. Now that I've pinned that side, I'm actually going to flip my top over and re-pin on my underside here. I'm going to pin it up that way. Right, nearly on top of that stitch line that we've just, existing stitch line for each side. Because this is the side I'm going to stitch from, and then I can take out those pins that I put up the front. I'm going to do the same for the underside, flip it up, re-pin it on this side, because this is the side I'm going to stitch from. And I'm just pinning through exactly all the layers, like exactly the way they're stitching, or they're fitting. Flip him over, then I can take out those top pins there. Make sure you take out these top pins, otherwise you won't be able to sew, because those pins, if you did, when you're stitching through, there'll be pins underneath here which you can't get your foot over. Okay, so now that I've done that, I've pinned on both sides, all I'm doing now is next to that stitch line. If you are an expert machinist, you can stitch exactly on that stitch line, go for it. I'm not an expert machinist, so I'm going to stitch, because I don't trust myself, I'm going to stitch slightly on the outside in the seam allowance, like 1 millimeter on the outside. The reason being, if you go and stitch on the inside, what you do is you affect the width of your welt, which you don't want to affect. Okay, so that's why I'm stitching slightly on the outside, because that way, if I happen to waver and go towards my inside of all that seam, at least I'm not going to cross over it. I know that that's the stop sign. Turn my machine on. Oh, that was fast. Okay, I'm just going and stitching exactly the same level as my previous stitch line, but it really doesn't matter. You can actually, if you would like, you can stitch right from the end and go all the way through to the other end. Doesn't matter. But I'm just going from exactly the same back tack stitch, exactly where my previous stitch line was. Either way is acceptable, makes no difference. So it's just a matter of whether you want to stitch to there or don't. See how you can see how it's just on the outside of that seam was where I've stitched right. But if you are an excellent machinist, then ideally stitch exactly on that stitch. But I know that I don't trust myself to accidentally wave it and make that the wilt skinnier. So same deal as this one, slightly on the outside, all the way through. Take my pins out as I go so I don't drive over the top of them. All the way through. Like I said, if you want to drive straight through to the end, makes no difference. So I've stitched just on the outside of that seam, top and bottom. What that stops is that jet from rolling and coming open. Otherwise, I'd be able to open it up and it would become flat. So every time I put my hand in my pocket, my jet would open up. Whereas this stops it from opening up. It's now solid and joined. Okay, so I've done that. And for the last part of this stage, I'm now going to place it so that it's the right side up. I'm going to put my facing, match my facing to the top edge, just like that. Remember, your facing is so when you look through your pocket, there's fabric behind it and not lining when you're putting your hand in and out. So I'm going to match up that same, and I'm going to stitch over exactly the same seam as I've just stitched right then. If you are super clever, you could actually do this step at the same time as stitching that original stitch line, okay? But if you're a bit scared things are going to move around, stitch that first stitch line first and then stitch exactly over that same stitch line that you've just done, okay? But you can definitely be done in the same process. If you feel that you're confident enough at your machining, you can definitely, when you're stitching that top welt together, you can put your that fabric behind it as well at exactly the same time and then just stitched all the way through in the one stitch line. Okay? So, start from the beginning again, what we've just done. We had our 2 rows of stitching.